They say in Lagos, everybody knows everybody's business. But there is a special kind of knowing, the kind that sits right in front of your eyes for years, waving its hands and calling your name, and you still manage to walk past it every single morning. I sold provisions on the corner of Akerele Street. I had a small shop, not big enough to be proud of, not small enough to be ashamed of. And from that shop, I watched Mama Bose work her magic for 11 years. 11 years I watched her. And still, when the truth finally came out on that rainy Thursday afternoon, I nearly fell off my stool. But let me tell you this properly. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning is the only place where anything makes sense. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're finding this story compelling, consider subscribing. We post new African stories every week, and your support allows us to keep bringing you these deeply interesting stories. Now, back to the story. Mama Bose arrived on Akerele Street the way all important things arrive in Lagos, suddenly, loudly, and without warning. One morning, she simply appeared, pushing a cart painted in the colors of the Nigerian flag, except she had added extra yellow because, in her own words, yellow is the color of money and I am a woman with plans. The cart carried bottles of the deepest crimson ZOBO drink, sweating with cold, arranged so beautifully they looked like they belonged in a proper store. She had tied a small Yoruba cloth around the handle, and from a tiny battery-powered speaker somewhere underneath came the faintest sound of juju music, so soft you would think the cart itself was singing.
She was 54 years old then, or thereabouts. Nobody knew her exact age because she gave a different answer each time anyone asked. "I am as old as these streets," she once told a child persistent enough to ask twice. "And this street was here before your grandfather's grandfather knew how to tie his wrapper." The child ran off confused. Mama Bo laughed until her belly shook. She was not a small woman. She had the build of someone who had once carried heavy things and had decided to keep that strength even after the heavy things were gone. Her hair was always tied in the same style, a neat gele, different colors on different days, and she owned enough of them that by the time she returned to any single color, a full month had passed. People started guessing what color gele Mama Bo would wear, the way people in other cities guessed tomorrow's weather. On Mondays, red. On Wednesdays, something green. On Thursdays, always a surprise. But it was her mouth that made her famous. Ah, that mouth. She had what the Yoruba call ahon oyin, a tongue of honey. It was not just that she spoke sweetly, it was that she spoke precisely. She had a gift for saying the exact thing that made each person feel seen and delighted. She would look at a tired bus conductor mopping sweat from his face at 8 in the morning and say something like, "Oga, that face, that is the face of a man who has been walking since before the sun remembered to rise. Come, let me give you something that will make your body remember it has a reason to continue." And the conductor, who had been planning to ignore her, would dig into his pocket before he even realized he was thirsty.
She called everyone my future millionaire. It was her signature greeting, and the neighborhood loved it because she said it to everybody equally. The banker in his starched suit, the Okada rider missing a side mirror, the woman hawking plantain chips, the schoolboy dragging his feet to class. Future millionaires, all of them, according to Mama Buse. She had a joke for every situation. When it rained and people ran for shelter, she would roll her cart directly into the downpour, laughing and shouting that her ZOBO was already red and what was a little more water. When the traffic wardens came to harass street traders, she would offer them a bottle with such theatrical ceremony that the wardens always left smiling, sometimes even forgetting to collect their bribe. She argued with bus conductors the way old friends argue, sharp, funny, ending always in laughter.
She had nicknames for the regulars that stuck so well, people forgot their actual names. There was Professor Thursday, a university lecturer who only bought ZOBO on Thursdays, always carrying his one leather briefcase, always standing in the same spot near the lamppost to drink his bottle before continuing to work. There was Madame Double Cup, a woman who drank twice and never admitted it, always asking for one bottle and then 10 minutes later returning with a sudden discovery that she was still thirsty. There was the tailor across the road she called Needle King because he once fixed a tear in her blouse so quickly she thought he had used magic.
By her second month on Akerele Street, Mama Bose had customers. By her third month, she had loyalists. By her fourth month, she was an institution. Her ZOBO was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. People who claimed they didn't like ZOBO would try hers and go quiet in the way people go quiet when they are being proven wrong. It was cold in a way that felt personal, sweet in a way that felt earned, with a depth of flavor that left you with a faint taste of something you couldn't quite name but desperately wanted again. Some people said she added ginger. Others swore it was cloves. A woman from the church claimed it was prayer. Mama Bose herself would never say. She would only wink and tell you that every great cook has a secret, and only fools give their secret away for free. She brewed it in a separate location, no one knew exactly where, and arrived every morning with her cart already loaded. Nobody questioned this. In Lagos, you don't ask a seller how their product was made. You buy it, you enjoy it, you come back. That is the whole transaction. So, that is the world that existed on Akerele Street. Bright, loud, chaotic, full of life, anchored by the cheerful woman with the crimson bottles and the honey tongue and the ever-rotating jelly. And then, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing, things began to go wrong.
The first person anyone should have connected to the ZOBO was Baba Remi. Baba Remi was a fabric merchant who had been selling cloth on Akerele Street for 22 years. He knew fabric the way a doctor knows the body, by touch, by instinct. He could feel the difference between genuine Ankara and a cheap imitation without looking. He could negotiate with suppliers in 3 languages and come out ahead every time. He was not a man who made bad decisions. He was a man whose decisions had earned him a reputation. He started drinking Mama Bose's ZOBO in her second month on the street. He became one of her most faithful customers. 2 bottles a day, sometimes 3. He liked it so much he started buying bottles to take home for his wife. Mama Bose called him Baba Remi Rockefeller because she said he had the bearing of an international businessman. And Baba Remi, who had never been called anything so impressive, would straighten his back a little taller each time she said it. 6 months after he started drinking the ZOBO, Baba Remi made the worst business decision of his 22-year career. He invested in a large shipment of fabric he had not properly inspected from a supplier he had met only twice, based on nothing more than a feeling he described as an unusual confidence. The fabric arrived damaged. He lost more money than I will say here, because money figures have a way of embarrassing the people they belong to. He stood in the street for a long time after he heard the news, looking at nothing. Then he went back to work. He recovered eventually because Baba Remi was the kind of man who recovers, but he was never quite as sharp again. Something in his calculations had shifted, like a table with one leg slightly shorter than the rest, still functional, but nothing you'd trust to hold anything precious. A few months after Baba Remi's loss, Madame Double Cup, her real name was Mrs. Funke Adeyemi, and she ran a small catering business from her compound, began having trouble at home. She and her husband, who by all accounts had been peaceable people,
started quarreling over extraordinary things. An argument over which direction the ceiling fan should point lasted 3 days, and disagreement about how much salt was appropriate in egusi soup became a week-long silence. Her husband, a gentle man known in the neighborhood for his patience, started walking with the stunned expression of someone who had been hit by something he never saw coming. The neighbors shook their heads and said it was the economy. They said it was stress. They said married couples always found something to fight about eventually. Nobody said ZOBO. Then came the students from the block behind the street. 3 of them, serious boys preparing for their university entrance exams, who had become regular customers of Mama Bose's because she gave them a small discount and called them my professors in training. They had been studying hard. Everyone on the street knew it because their lights were on until midnight and they could be heard drilling each other on mathematics from an open window.
They sat their exams. 2 of them failed subjects they had mastered so completely they could recite the formulas in their sleep. One passed, but could not explain afterward how he had answered certain questions. He said it was like someone had rearranged his memory while he was sleeping, moved things to rooms he couldn't find. He passed by luck more than knowledge, and he knew it, and that knowledge disturbed him more than a failure would have. And then, strangest of all, the neighborhood gossipers began to dry up. This may not sound like a tragedy to you, but you must understand. The gossip network of Akerele Street was a living thing, as important to the social fabric of the neighborhood as the church on one end and the mosque on the other. There were 3 women in particular, women of tremendous social intelligence and equally tremendous dedication to knowing everything about everyone, who held together the neighborhood's understanding of itself. They were the archive, the newspaper, and the warning system all at once. If something happened on Akerele Street and the 3 senators did not know about it by noon, it had not truly happened yet. Mama Bose had charmed all 3 of them. She called them my 3 senators of the Republic and credited them with being the wisest women on the street, which they found both accurate and flattering. They were among her best customers. But by the time Babaremi had lost his money and the students had lost their exams, the 3 senators were drying up. They would gather, as they always did, near my provision shop at mid-morning and sit and look at each other and find they had almost nothing to say. Information that used to come to them naturally now slipped past them. Stories they had always tracked suddenly had missing chapters. One of them told me privately that she would watch something happen directly in front of her eyes and then, by evening, find she could not recall it clearly enough to repeat it. "Something is wrong with my head," she said to me. She said it like a woman confessing a sin. "I am forgetting things I have no business forgetting." I told her she was tired. I told her she needed to rest. This is what we all tell each other when we do not want to admit that something might be genuinely wrong. All this time, through Babaremi's ruin, through the married couple's quarrels, through the students' failure, through the gossipers' silence, one person on Akerele Street was screaming at the top of her lungs that the ZOBO was to blame. But nobody was listening because the person screaming was Madame Tomorrow. Nobody knew Madame Tomorrow's real name. Nobody knew where she had come from, though several competing theories existed. She was a professor who had gone mad from too much reading. She was a woman whose husband had stolen her property and driven her into the streets. She was a spirit wearing a human body to test the neighborhood's patience. She had been homeless on Akerele Street for as long as anyone could remember, sleeping behind the bus stop, surviving on food that sympathetic traders occasionally left out, wearing so many layers of cloth even in the dry season heat that she looked twice her actual size. When she walked, the layers moved separately, like she was accompanied by a small, invisible crowd. She was called Madame Tomorrow because she was always issuing warnings about things that were going to happen. Tomorrow, she would say, tomorrow you will see. Tomorrow it will be your turn. And for years, nothing she predicted came to pass in any way that was recognizable. So the name had become a kind of joke. A way of saying, here is a woman who lives permanently in a future that never arrives. But when Mama Bose appeared on Akirini Street with her ZOBO cat, something ignited in Madame Tomorrow. The first day Mama Bose set up, Madame Tomorrow appeared at a distance, watched the cat for a long time, then disappeared. The second day, she came closer. By the third day, she was standing near the cat, staring at it with an intensity that made two customers quietly take their bottles and step aside. Mama Bose noticed her immediately. She looked at Madame Tomorrow the way a market woman looks at someone she suspects might try to steal, with an eye that smiles and calculates at the same time. My future millionaire, Mama Bose said, opening her arms wide. Even this great woman has come to taste the sweetest thing on this street. Madame Tomorrow pointed at the cat. Then she pointed at Mama Bose. Then she said quietly and clearly, I have seen this before. Mama Bose blinked. Then she laughed. A big, generous laugh designed to reassure the customers who were watching. You have seen ZOBO before? My sister, everybody has seen ZOBO. This is Nigeria, but you have never tasted my ZOBO. Come, let me give you a taste. I am not talking about ZOBO, Madame Tomorrow said. Then she walked away. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed Mama Bose's face. I was watching from my shop. I was the only one watching carefully because the customers had already moved on, reassured by the laughter. But I saw it, a tightening around the eyes, gone in a second. Then the smile returned, bigger than before. I told myself I had imagined it. After that day, Madame Tomorrow began her campaign. Every morning, when Mama Bose appeared at the corner pushing her cart, Madame Tomorrow appeared too from wherever she had slept and began following the cart through the street, calling out warnings in a voice that carried 3 streets over. People of Akerele, do not drink from this woman's bottles. I am telling you, do not let that red water touch your tongue. There is something inside it that does not belong to this world. Something was added. Something was spoken over it. I have seen this woman before. Not here, not on this street, but I have seen her. And what she carries in that cart is not just ZOBO. This was the part where people began laughing. Because Madame Tomorrow, for all the urgency of her warning, delivered it in a way that sounded like the opening of a particularly dramatic Nollywood film. She used her hands too much. Her layers of cloth got tangled in her feet as she walked fast, so that she appeared to be in a constant state of nearly falling, but miraculously never quite falling. Her voice would crack at the most dramatic moments into something between a shout and a wail that the children on the street had begun to imitate. And when enough people gathered to watch, she would address the crowd with the dignity of a university vice-chancellor, pointing at the ZOBO cat like a prosecutor, pointing at evidence that, unfortunately, no one else could see. Children adored her. From the first week, whenever they saw her begin to follow the cat, they would drop whatever they were doing and join the procession, a small army of children marching behind Madame Tomorrow, who marched behind Mama Bose, so that the whole morning looked like a chaotic parade without a permit. Parents would stand at doorways, shaking their heads and smiling. It was the morning's free entertainment. And Mama Bose, brilliant, unflappable Mama Bose, turned even this into performance. She started timing her responses to Madame Tomorrow's outbursts. She would wait until the warning reached its most urgent pitch, and then she would spin around and say something so perfectly calibrated that the crowd would dissolve into laughter before Madame Tomorrow could finish her sentence.
"This woman says there is something in my ZOBO," she announced to the crowd one morning, arms thrown wide. "And she is correct. There is hibiscus, there is ginger, there is cloves, there is the prayer of a hard-working woman who wakes before the sun. If any of these things frighten you, please leave Lagos immediately and go back to the village." The crowd roared. Another day, "My sister here is following me because she loves me. She is my free advertising. Because she shouts my name all day, everybody on 5 streets knows Mama Bossy. I should be paying her commission." She then turned to Madame Tomorrow with complete seriousness and said, "What is your bank account number, my future millionaire?" The crowd roared again. Another Thursday, when Madame Tomorrow's warning grew particularly detailed and impassioned, Mama Bossy put her hands on her hips and said in a stage whisper, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Before I came to this street, this woman had nothing to do. Look at her now. She has purpose. She has a schedule. Every morning she wakes up, takes her bath." She paused here for effect, eyeing Madame Tomorrow's layers of cloth, "or does not take her bath and comes to work. I have given this woman employment. You are welcome, my sister." Madame Tomorrow would stand in the middle of all this laughter with a sorrow on her face that was too specific for someone merely delusional. She didn't look like a woman who had lost her mind. She looked like a woman who had been correct about something terrible and could not make anyone believe her, which, as it turned out, was exactly what she was. The laughter seemed to move through her rather than land on her, like she was standing in rain she had already accepted would not stop.
But we didn't know that then. We only knew that Thursday mornings were free comedy, courtesy of the ZOBO cat and its loyal shadow. I should tell you when I started to wonder. It was not when Baba Remi lost his money. It was not when the students failed their exams. It was not even when the 3 senators started sitting together in silence. It was the evening Mama Carol came to my shop at closing time and said she needed to talk to someone because she was afraid she was losing her mind. Mama Carol was a seamstress who had been on the street for 15 years. She was steady the way certain trees are steady, the kind that don't shake even in strong wind. She was not dramatic. She was not a gossip. She was a woman who went to work, came home, raised her children, and told the truth without ornament. She sat on the bench outside my shop and told me that she had been drinking Mama Bosse's ZOBO for 8 months. She told me that in the last 3 months, she had made mistakes in her work she could not explain, cutting fabric in the wrong direction twice, sewing a pattern backwards 3 times, forgetting measurements she had taken that same morning. She had lost 2 clients. A third was wavering. "I am not this woman," she said. "I have been sewing for 15 years. My hands know fabric the way your hands know your children's faces. But it is like something is coming between my knowledge and my hands. Like there's a small fog I cannot see, but it is there. Like trying to grab something through water."
I looked at her for a long time. I asked, "When did it start?" She thought. She said 8 months ago, roughly. I thought about Baba Remi. I thought about the students. I thought about the senators. I thought about how these were all people who had one thing in common, and that thing sat in a crimson bottle inside a cat painted yellow for money. "Are you still drinking the ZOBO?" I asked. She said she was. She said it was the one thing that still made her happy in the middle of all the confusion. One cold bottle at noon, like a small mercy in a difficult season. I didn't say anything to her about my thoughts. Not then. I was not ready to say something I could not prove. In Lagos, you can lose a friendship very quickly for saying the wrong, unproven thing. But I started to pay a different kind of attention. I began watching who bought the ZOBO. I kept informal track, not in a book, just in my head, of how those people's circumstances seemed to be moving. This took time because the consequences were not immediate. They were slow. They appeared weeks, sometimes months, after a person became a regular customer. And they were always in the same direction, downward. Not catastrophically, not always, but steadily. A dulling of some edge that had been sharp. A decision made badly where good decisions had come easily before. A forgetting of things that should have been remembered. What confused me was Mama Buse herself.
She was thriving. She was more energetic, more charming, more sharp-tongued than ever. In a strange reversal of her customers' declining clarity, she seemed to be getting clearer, sharper, funnier. Her comebacks to Madame Tomorrow improved each week as if she were in training. She added new customers every month, while her existing customers, I noticed, never seemed to improve their circumstances the way you would expect of people in a rising neighborhood. I do not know how to explain how a person can watch something for as long as I watched it and still resist naming what they see. But that is what I did. I watched and I resisted naming it. Because the name, when it finally began forming itself in my mind, was too strange to say out loud in daylight on a street in Lagos to a person you expected to take you seriously. The Thursday it all ended was a Thursday in the rainy season. The sky had been threatening all morning. Dark clouds, the color of old iron, gathered over the neighborhood from before 6 a.m. And the air had the heavy, expectant quality of a room full of people who know something is about to be said but are pretending otherwise. Mama Bosse arrived at her usual time. She was in a bright orange gele. I remember it exactly. The color of a sunset fighting against clouds. She was singing as she came around the corner, one of her made-up songs involving a melody borrowed from an old high life record and new words about the superior quality of her ZOBO. A few children were already running toward her. Professor Thursday was walking from his bus stop with his briefcase, already reaching for his wallet. Then Madame Tomorrow appeared. She came from the direction of the bus stop, which was unusual. Normally, she emerged from the opposite end of the street. She was not doing her usual half-running, cloth-tangling pursuit. She was walking, slowly, deliberately, with her eyes fixed on Mama Bosse in a way that made the children who usually followed her hold back a little, the way animals hold back when something in the air has changed. Mama Bosse, she said, just her name, nothing else. And something about the quiet of it, after years of theatrical screaming, made everyone on the street stop what they were doing. Mama Bosse turned. She looked at Madame Tomorrow. The tightening around the eyes appeared again. Quick, controlled, gone. Ah! Mama Bosse said, spreading her arms. My early morning entertainment has arrived early today. People of Akerele, your Thursday drama is... Show them, Madame Tomorrow said, cutting through the laughter before it could fully form. Show them the bottom of your cat. Silence. Not the silence of a crowd waiting to laugh, a different kind. The kind that comes when something unnamed has suddenly been named. Which bottom? Mama Bosse said. She was still smiling, but it was a smile being held in place by effort rather than feeling. I had been watching this woman's face for 11 years. I knew the difference. The bottom,
Madame Tomorrow said. The small door, the thing you add last every morning before you leave your house. Show them or let them look.
Mama Bose turned to the crowd with a laugh and a wide gesture of invitation. People, this woman wants to inspect my cat. After 11 years on this street, my cat needs inspection. Somebody call the street committee. Somebody call the food safety authority. Somebody call... But Professor Thursday, who was standing nearest to the cat with his leather briefcase hanging from his hand, had already crouched down. He wasn't playing along with the laughter. He had heard something in Madame Tomorrow's voice that was different from every other Thursday, and he was a man trained to notice when a tone changes. There was a silence that felt like the whole street was holding a single breath. Professor Thursday stood up. In his hand was a small bottle, smaller than a medicine bottle, sealed with dark wax the color of dried blood. The kind of bottle that has no label because it was never meant to be sold. The kind that exists in a category of things people know about, theoretically, and do not ever expect to encounter in actual life, on an actual street, in their actual hands. "What is this?" he asked. His voice was very quiet, in the way professors' voices get when they are certain of something and deeply disturbed by their certainty. Mama Bose looked at the bottle. She looked at the crowd. She looked at Madame Tomorrow. And for the first time in 11 years on Akerele Street, the honey tongue went silent. What followed was not neat. It is never neat when a truth arrives late. People talked over each other. Some demanded explanations, their voices climbing over one another. Some moved away from the cat. Two women who had ZOBO bottles in their hands set them down very carefully on the road, as if the bottles had become something other than what they believed they were holding. The children who had run toward the cat now stood in a cluster near the lamppost, uncertain. 3 of them quietly began moving backward. Madame Tomorrow stood in the center of it all without speaking. She had said what she came to say. She didn't need to perform anymore. She stood with her arms at her sides, watching, and something in her posture, the way a person stands when they are exhausted from being right for too long, made me look away for a moment. It was Mama Caro who asked the question that cut through all the noise. She had not spoken yet, had only been standing near my shop with her arms folded, watching. She waited until the crowd's shouting had churned itself out. Then she said, in her steady seamstress's voice, "Mama Boss, did you know what it was doing to us?" The crowd went quiet. Mama Boss looked at Mama Caro for a long time, long enough that people started shifting their weight, uncomfortable. Then she did something no one had ever seen her do on Akerele Street. She sat down on the edge of her cart. She sat down like a woman whose bones had been carrying weight for a long time and had suddenly decided they were finished. She spoke slowly. She said she had been very poor. She said this plainly, without self-pity, the way you state a fact you have long since made peace with. She had been poor, and she was getting old, and she had tried many things that had not worked. And one evening, she had sat in a market on the other side of Lagos and cried the kind of crying that has nothing theatrical in it, just a woman and her emptiness, alone. A man had approached her. She described him only as a man who sat under a blue umbrella, which was strange because it was not raining. She said he had kind eyes. She said this with no particular emotion, as if kindness in the eyes of someone who would do harm was simply a fact about the world she had not yet understood. The man had given her a recipe. He had also given her a small sealed bottle, the one now in Professor Thursday's hand. He told her that her ZOBO would be extraordinary. He told her it would make people want to come back again and again, that their thirst for it would be real and lasting. She said she had asked him what the price was. He told her there was no price for her.
The price, he said, would be paid by the people who drank it. She paused for a long time after saying this. The street was very quiet. In the distance, thunder moved across the sky like furniture being pushed across an empty room. She said she had not asked what price they would pay, and she said it in the voice of a woman who had replayed that moment 10,000 times and had never, in all that replaying, managed to make herself into someone who had asked.
I told myself, she said finally, that he meant their money. I told myself he meant they would spend freely because they loved the taste and could not help themselves. I told myself it was just a charm for sweetness. She looked at the small bottle in Professor Thursday's hand. I knew, she said quietly, that I did not believe that. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Baba Remy, who had been standing at the back of the crowd the whole time with his arms crossed and his face very still, said, 11 years. Just those 2 words, but they carried everything. The weight of what had been taken without asking from every person on this street who had trusted a smiling woman with a colorful cat and a honey tongue and a gele that changed colors like the seasons. They took the small bottle away. Some said a pastor received it. Others said a babalawo on Lagos Island neutralized whatever was inside it properly with ceremony. I do not know which story is true, and I am not sure it matters. What matters is that it left the street and certain things came back slowly in its absence. Mama Bossy left Akerele Street that same evening while most people had gone inside. She packed up her cart quietly, no songs, no jokes, no my future millionaires. She was simply gone by morning and she did not come back. Some people said they saw her months later in another part of Lagos selling something different, plain tomatoes or pepper with no part, no speaker, no signature greeting. Whether she had become someone different or simply become quieter about who she had always been, I could not say. I thought about her more than I expected to.
What happened to the people who had been drinking the ZOBO was gradual, like watching a sky clear after a long rain. Baba Remy's sharpness returned slowly, tingling, uncertain at first, then steadier. He made a good business decision in his first month of recovery that he described to me as feeling like myself again. And I watched his back straighten in the way it used to when Mama Bose called him Rockefeller, except this time it was straightening from the inside out. The 3 senators recovered their gift for knowing things, though for several months they remained oddly careful about sharing what they knew, as if they had learned something about the weight of information and were not yet sure they had earned the right to carry it lightly again. The students sat their receipt exams. 2 passed well. The 3rd took longer, but he told me once, with a seriousness he had not possessed before, that the failure had taught him something passing would not have. He said it carefully, like a man who had thought it through, and was not simply saying what sounded right. Mama Caro got her hands back. That is how she described it. I got my hands back. She said the fog lifted over 3 or 4 months, and then one morning, she sat at her machine, cut a piece of fabric, and felt the precision return. She sat still for a moment after, she told me, just to acknowledge it. She did not specify to whom.
And Madame Tomorrow? On the Friday after Mama Bose left, Madame Tomorrow was not at the bus stop. By Saturday, people noticed she was not sleeping behind it either. Someone went to look for her in her usual spot and came back empty-handed. She was simply gone. No farewell, no final warning, no declaration of vindication she had earned so completely it would have been the most deserved speech in the history of Akerele Street. She simply disappeared. The day after the truth came out, as if the truth had been the only thing keeping her in that place.
Some of the children who had once followed her processions through the street started leaving small things at the bus stop. A piece of bread, a bottle of water, a flower once from someone's compound, not because any adult told them to, just because children sometimes understand things faster than adults do. And these children understood that something important had passed through their streets wearing layers of cloth and speaking in warnings, and they had been too young and too entertained to know what it was while it was still there. I have thought many times about what this story means. Not the big moral, the warning about trusting charming strangers, or the lesson about listening to the voices you dismiss. Those things are real, but they feel too neat for what this story actually was. What I keep returning to is the smaller, stranger truth, the way a whole street of intelligent, observant people managed year after year to not see what was directly in front of them.
We are not stupid people on Akirele Street. Baba Remi ran a business for 22 years on instinct and calculation. The three senators knew this neighborhood better than its own drainage system. Professor Thursday had letters after his name and a career built on careful thinking. I had been watching this street from my shop for decades, and I believed that watching was the same as understanding. And still, the only one who saw clearly was the one we agreed, collectively, was not worth listening to. There is a Yoruba saying, "Eni abafio wobu, ni a onigbo wonre." The one we push aside with our hands is the one whose voice we will not hear. And what I understand it to mean now is that dismissing someone is not a passive thing. It is an active choice made and remade every morning to not hear what they are saying. We chose not to hear Madam Tomorrow. We made her funny because funny was easier than afraid. We made her a performance because a performance cannot be right, and if she was a performance, then we were safe. We gave her a name, Madam Tomorrow, that made her warnings into a joke before she even opened her mouth. I think about the morning she stood there in her layers of cloth and said quietly, "Show them the bottom of your cat." She had been saying the truth for years in the loudest way she knew. When loud was not working, she tried quiet, and quiet finally worked. There is a lesson in that about timing and patience that I am still learning. I don't know what to make of Mama Busi. I have tried, and I cannot reach a simple verdict. She was not simply a villain. She was a desperate woman who made a choice that hurt people, and then told herself a story about that choice for so long that the story almost became true. The Yoruba call this Ifarabale Iro, the comfort of a lie one has made peace with. She found her comfort. The people of Akerele Street paid for it over 11 years. But I also know that I watched her for those 11 years and never truly looked. Maybe that is the thing I come back to, sitting in my shop in the evenings now, watching the street settle into its quiet. Not Mama Bose's guilt, not the magic in the sealed bottle, not even the mystery of a homeless woman who disappeared the moment her warning was finally believed. Just the simple, uncomfortable fact that the truth was there every Thursday morning, dressed in layers of cloth, nearly falling over its own feet, calling itself Madam Tomorrow, and we were too busy laughing to listen. We had 11 years of warnings. We gave them back as entertainment. And the lesson this street learned, at the cost of Baba Remi's savings and Mama Caro's hands and the students' exams and the senator's memory and years of careful lives quietly being turned sideways, is the oldest lesson there is. The one every grandmother in every village already knows before any of us are old enough to forget it. The person everyone laughs at is not always wrong. Sometimes they are the only person in the whole crowd who is right. And by the time you understand that, you have already paid the price of not believing them.